There is a moment in every human life, sometimes small, sometimes catastrophic, when a person quietly realizes the following: I cannot keep living with the same intellectual structure I always have. This realization can arrive at 20, at 40, or at 80, or never. It doesn't care about age. It arrives when the old architecture about you, your habits, your impulses, your inherited ideas finally collapses under the weight of reality. And when that happens, we start asking questions that no teacher and no society adequately prepares for. What does it mean to become a mature human being? Not simply an adult, not someone who pays bills or follows rules, but a mature human being, someone whose mind is steady, whose character is coherent, and whose spirit strives towards meaning. It's strange how universal this longing is. Every culture, every religion, every philosophy, every psychological framework has tried to describe what a mature human being looks like. And yet, when people talk about it, they usually reduce it to cliches. Many psychological models define maturity as emotion regulation or impulse control. That's essential, but it's not enough. Many philosophical traditions define maturity as the ability to use reason. That's noble, but incomplete. And many spiritual traditions describe it as transcending the self, and that's profound, but too ambiguous. The concept of mature in this video is pointing to something deeper, more structural, more ontological. A mature human being is not defined by age, success, or their temperament. It is defined by the architecture of the inner world, the way the mind thinks, the character behaves, and the spirit seeks meaning. This video will be a slow walk through those three layers. The first dimension is the mind. Not intelligence, not knowledge, but clarity. Philosophers like Plato or René Descartes emphasize that without clarity, the inner world collapses. Aristotle believed that reason is that what allows us to control or orient our desires instead of being enslaved by them. Modern neuroscientists like Daniel Kahneman describe something similar: the shift from impulsive thinking to reactive thinking. And neuroscience shows too. When the prefrontal cortex regulates the limbic system, emotions stop hijacking your behavior, and clarity becomes possible. By but psychological clarity, it's not abstract; it's deeply practical. So a mind that is maturing is able to do these three things. The first one is that it can name reality without collapsing into it. In cognitive therapy, this is named the labeling effect. Emotions lose power when they are named. And Winnicott said something similar: the ability to hold experience without becoming overwhelmed. It's the beginning of internal reflection. To say this is fear, not doom. This is ego, not truth. Half of suffering dissolves there. The second thing is that a mature mind can't sustain complexity. Scott Fitzgerald famously said that a first-rate intelligence is capable of holding two opposite ideas at the same time. Philosophers call this dialectical reasoning, and neuroscientists call this cognitive flexibility. Is that what protects us from ideology, fanatism, and rigidity? Third, a mature mind practices perspective taking. Peter Fonagy called this mentalization, the capacity to understand one's own mind and the mind of others simultaneously. In the same way, Kierkegaard saw it as self-awareness, the ability to stand outside oneself and see one's life with honest eyes. This is the beginning of freedom because the mind cannot see itself, it cannot guide itself. And this is why maturity starts with clarity. Clarity is the lens through which every other dimension becomes visible. If the mind is the lens, the psyche, the inner emotional world, is the landscape being seen. For Jung, the psyche was not a mere set of emotions, but a vast territory of shadows, identity, instincts, and symbolic life. For modern clinicians like Bessel van der Kolk and Bowlby, it is where trauma, attachment, and emotional regulation shapes everything we later call personality. The reason this dimension matters is simple. No matter how intelligent someone is, if their emotional world is wounded, chaotic, or unintegrated, their life will reflect it. Therefore, maturity at the level of the psyche has three movements. First is the movement toward emotional literacy. This echoes the work of Winnicott and Fonagy, the capacity to feel without drowning and to understand emotion as information, not dictators. It's the shift from I'm anxious to anxiety is moving through me. Second is the movement towards integration of identity. Alistair McEnroe and Paul Ricoeur argue that human beings live through narrative. Jung said the same differently. He said we must integrate the shadows, the parts of us we avoid. Kierkegaard, on the other hand, framed it existentially. Becoming a self requires relating to yourself transparently. Without this integration, identity becomes fragmented, reactive, defensive, and unstable. So the third is the movement toward inner identity. Clinically, this is emotional regulation. Existentially, it is authenticity, the ability to inhabit one's life honestly. James Hollis called it claiming one's inner authority. This dimension is where most people stay stuck, not because they are weak, but because the psyche is a difficult terrain. It holds our childhood patterns, our fears, our shadows, our masks, our wounds. But maturing the psyche is exactly what allows a person stop repeating the same emotional patterns year after year. It's what allows someone to feel deeply without being controlled by what they feel. If the mind gives clarity and the psyche gives depth, the character is where the inner world becomes action. Aristotle argued that virtue is not a belief, it's an habit, a stable pattern of behavior that reveals the shape of a person's soul. Modern psychologists call this trait stability, while neuroscientists call this behavioral coherence. Character is not personality, it's not charm, it's not kindness, it's not confidence. Character is the part of you that reality eventually will test. A mature character has three things that appears across traditions. First, integrity, not moral perfection, but alignment. When what you think, say, or do are not in war with each other. Frankl say integrity is what allows a person withstand suffering without collapsing internally. The second is discipline. Understanding discipline as the ability to act according to your values and not to your mood. Friedrich Nietzsche called this become who you are, choosing your identity actively and not passively. Behavioral psychologists see this as long-term reward orientation instead of impulse-driven gratification. And the third trait of character is responsibility, not as self-blame but as sovereignty. It is the moment one stops outsourcing one's life to circumstances. Carl Rogers described this as organismic autonomy. It is the moment a person becomes self-directed at the deepest level. When characters mature, a person becomes reliable, not perfect, but solid. someone who does not betray themselves. Character is then the bridge between inner truth and outer reality. And the last part is the spirit. Beyond mind, psyche, and character, every tradition places a fourth dimension, the spirit, or the orientation towards meaning. Not religion, not dogma, not rituals, but meaning. Viktor Frankl called this the will to meaning. William James saw this spiritual experience as a mode of consciousness and not a belief system. Charles Taylor argued that every life is lived towards an horizon of significance, a background that gives actions weight. Meanwhile, Kierkegaard frame it as the self relating to something beyond itself, a movement towards transcendence. So, spirit in this sense is the part of you that asks, what is my life for? Maturity of spirit avoids two different extremes. For one side, it avoids fanatism, where meaning becomes ideology. And for the other side, it avoids nihilism, where meaning becomes irrelevant. The mature spirit walks in the middle path, seeking truth without arrogance and holding meaning without rigidity. It recognizes the transcendent dimension without demanding certainty. It moves toward depth without rejecting reason, and it treats existence as meaningful without needing to define that meaning exhaustively. Psychologically, this proves coherence. Existentially, it proves orientation. And spiritually, it provides a subtle gravity towards what is eternal. This is not about belief, it's about orientation, a life orienting upward rather than inward. So, when the mind is clear, the psyche is integrated, the character is stable, and the spirit is moving towards meaning, a person becomes a whole, not perfect, not immune to suffering, but grounded, lucid, and internally aligned. Most suffering comes from disalignment, a brilliant mind with a chaotic psyche, or perhaps a deep soul with weak character, or a strong character without a sense of meaning. So maturity starts when we recognize these four dimensions and start to cultivate them consciously. And this channel exists for that, to explore all these layers with honesty, rigor, and intellectual depth. What really means to grow as a human. If this resonates with you, you are welcome. And let's keep thinking together.